and seismic effects. Now, Judy's conducted calculations and looked at other structures that were demolished and compared their mass to their seismic effects. And it has determined that the seismic effects here of the Twin Towers coming down should have been far more massive, on the order of 3.6, not 2.1 to 2.3. And of course, remember that bathtub wasn't done in. If that bathtub had been shattered, I'll tell you how striking it is about the bathtub. They're doing the cleanup, and they want to bring down a part of Building 6. How do they do it? They connect cables. They pull it over with cables. And you got these construction guys saying, this is really weird. He says, it's the first time we pulled a building using cables. And they were doing it with cables because they had to be gentle so they wouldn't damage the bathtub. The bathtub was so fragile that if they pulled down the remnants of Building 6, they had to do it using cables so they wouldn't damage the bathtub. Well, can you imagine what would have happened if these 500,000 ton buildings, actually all that mass had come down on those bathtubs? And as I pointed out, the subway tunnels weren't flooded. There was damage, but it never incapacitated the functional ability of the bathtub. And remember that 30-ton chunk falling over. Even Steve Jones in his essay says he can't understand it, he can't believe it. Here it is turning to dust before his very eyes. Now in this essay, he's claiming RDX, could have been used 3,000, he claims 3,000 pounds RDX could have been used to destroy these buildings. Well, to this day, so far as I know, we have no evidence of RDX having been present. And the hypothesis it was super thermate seems to be more of a promise than a delivery, since we don't even know that it actually existed. Here again, Judy calls this a snowball. This is the south tower coming down. The north tower in the background is that top smoke at the very top. Now what's most important about this is you can actually see the demolition wave right there at the bottom of the snowball. And what's interesting is there's nothing between the snowball and the ground. I mean, that's Building 7 in the background. Remember, Building 7 is 47 stories high. So this is, more than half of the building has come down. But notice there's nothing between the destruction wave and the ground. Meaning there's nothing that's freely falling to the ground that's ahead of the destruction wave. The destruction wave is ahead of anything that would eventually hit the ground. I mean, the building's being blown up faster than free fall. That's the point here. And, get this, Judy discovered that there was a stand down for aircraft in the air that was directed and implemented before the south tower came down and was removed after the north tower came down. And this raises the question, was there something about whatever was the massive source of energy that was used to perform these feats that might have taken aircraft out of the sky? So here are some of her points about what we need to explain. The Twin Towers were destroyed faster than physics under free fall alone. The protective bathtub wasn't significantly damaged. The rail lines, car lines, tunnel had only light damage. That's the subways. The seismic impact was too small in comparison with the King Dome being one of her cases. They were destroyed from the top down, not the bottom up. The upper 80% approximately of each tower was turned into fine dust and didn't hit the earth. Office paper, this is fascinating, was densely spread throughout lower Manhattan, unburned, often alongside burning cars. This is very strange. You got all this paper all over Manhattan and all this dust, and the paper isn't burned up. And then you can have a car that's half of it's on fire and the other half looks like it's brand new alongside of the paper, and the paper is unburned. Then you get these holes, these vertical round holes in buildings 4, 5, 6. There's a cylindrical arc into Bankers Trust. All planes were told to order down. The 1,400 toasted cars. The order of the destruction of the tower appears to have been intended to minimize the damage to the bathtub. The Twin Towers were destroyed as though it were just to take out the WTC prefix buildings and no others. The north wing of WTC-4 was left standing, neatly sliced from the main body. I'll show you this in a moment. 1 and 2 rubble pile was far too small to account for the mass. Unlike that of WTC-7. Actually, in the case of 7, you see all the mass of rubble. Well, look at this. Why am I talking about plasma? Turns out plasma, and I'm just beginning, look, frankly, we don't know how this was done. I'm telling you, there are a lot of it appears to me that evidence is overwhelming that it was, of course, not natural causes. Nobody's going to have any serious doubt about that. But also not conventional causes. This appears to have involved some kind of unconventional mode of destruction. Why is plasma interesting? Well, it operates at tens of thousands of degrees and it brings about molecular dissociation, unlike thermite, which operates only at thousands of degrees and has no known pulverization mechanism. it creates this massive cloud of smoke at intensely high temperature. It's like a volcanic explosion. It's known as a pyroclastic dust cloud. So that's unavoidable with plasma, but can't be accounted for on thermite. You may have something that's analogous to molten metal but gradual cooling. It's very hard to figure out how this happens on the thermite hypothesis. I mean, it's just, now look at this new evidence. I've only discovered this in the last 2 weeks, okay? It turns out that there's a hangar out at JFK that has a lot of debris from the World Trade Center. I at least didn't even know was there. And look at this. Can you imagine the massive temperatures involved in fusing, floors of buildings together like this? Now look at that. That's a main support beam. What kind of temperature could have warped it like that? It had to be huge, huge. This is no thermate effect. We're talking about some massive source of energy. Here's the top of that antenna at the top of the North Tower. Part of it actually survived. That's pretty fascinating. Now, an hypothesis that Judy and Morgan are contemplating is that conventional explosives may have been used to initiate the collapse and to complete it. And then in the middle, you had like 80% of the building that was pulverized by some very sophisticated high-tech weapon. Here's more evidence. This is like a whole bunch of floors that are fused together. That's a whole bunch of floors there. Can you believe that? Fused together. This, because it has so much rebar and so forth, there's a whole bunch of floors fused together, but it looks like it may have come from the parking structure. Look at a close-up. I mean, that almost looks like some alien object from outer space. I mean, that's pretty weird looking, isn't it? In fact, so they refer to these fused structures as asteroids because they sort of resemble asteroids. Here's another, look at this. Massive columns all warped by what has to have been some incredible source of heat. Now here's Steve Jones' major paper. I just want to make a couple observations. I mean, I'm very glad Steve got into this business. I was delighted when he became my co-chair. We separated because he didn't think that discussion of these issues, these alternative hypotheses, should be in the public domain. He thought it should be discussed in private. Personally, I think he was being protective of his own preferred hypothesis, but mark this point well. You cannot show that an hypothesis is the best among the available alternatives unless you compare it to the available alternatives. What could be more obvious than that? And yet Stephen Jones has advanced a model of scientific method that I have explained in other contexts is demonstrably inadequate because it suggests that you can do science by just looking at one hypothesis. Well, that's impossible. You can't show the hypothesis is the most defensible unless you compare it.